Hello, this is our Chapter 16 lecture on respiration. The respiratory system includes ventilation, which is the mechanical process that moves air into and out of the lungs. Another word for that is just breathing. It includes gas exchange between the blood and lungs and between the blood and tissues. And it includes oxygen utilization by tissues used to make ATP, which is needed for cellular respiration. And of course, we know that is via the process of oxidative phosphorylation, which makes the majority of ATP in our cells. So ventilation and gas exchange occur in the lungs, and we refer to that as being external respiration because it is exchanging gases with the external environment or air. And then in contrast, we have internal respiration, which refers to oxygen utilization and gas exchange specifically in the tissues of our body. Notably, gas exchange in the lungs occurs by diffusion. And as we talked about before, gases can freely diffuse across the membrane of cells. So this is a very easy process. And the oxygen concentration is higher in the lungs than it is in the blood. This facilitates the diffusion of oxygen from the lungs into the blood. And then in contrast, carbon dioxide concentration in the blood is higher than that of the carbon dioxide concentration in the lungs. So CO2 diffuses out of the blood and into the lungs. So we can then exhale the carbon dioxide, and we're inhaling. As we inhale, we're bringing in oxygen, and then as we're exhaling, we're breathing out carbon dioxide. So if we look at the pathway of airflow, which is called ventilation, we have air traveling down the nasal cavity, then it travels to the pharynx, and then to the larynx, where we have the vocal cords, then to the trachea, then to the right and left primary bronchi, the secondary bronchi, to the tertiary bronchi, to the terminal bronchioles, to the respiratory zone, and then finally to the terminal alveolar sacs. And critically, there are two different zones that we have in the lungs, and we call these the conducting zone and respiratory zone. So the conducting zone transports air to the lungs. It warms, humidifies, filters, and cleans the air. In the conducting zone, we have mucus. Mucus will critically trap small particles, and then cilia, which we mentioned participate in the innate immune system. They actually push microbes away from the lungs and into the mucus so they can be swallowed and sent down the esophagus to the stomach, where there's a pH of 1 that can kill most microorganisms. And in the conducting zone, we also have voice production that occurs in the larynx. And as air passes over the vocal cords, these vibrations can make speech and noises. So these are the areas of the conducting zone, right? With the trachea, the primary bronchus, we have these bronchial trees with these terminal bronchioles, and these are all the conducting zone. And at the very end, we have these terminal bronchioles. We have these alveoli, and one of them is called an alveolus, and this is where respiration occurs. This is where gas exchange occurs between the alveolus and alveolus of the lungs, and then capillaries that are in the pulmonary system. So the lung capillaries will exchange gases with the alveoli. And I just want to point out, if you look at all these regions, most of these regions are the conducting region. only the very bottom is the respiratory zone, right? So the respiratory bronchioles, which are the last zone, are the ones that are included in the respiratory zone, this and the alveoli, and everything else is the conducting zone. And I want to point out there's so many branches. These terminal bronchioles have so many branches that branch out to these alveoli. So here's just another diagram showing where we have the larynx with the vocal cords, and then how it goes down to the trachea, right, and then to the left and primary bronchi. And then here's another diagram, and I want to point out how these bronchi are really spreading out in all these branches, so we can have tons and tons of alveoli that are going to be there for gas exchange, and how they all interface to these bigger tubules that can conduct airflow. So what I'm showing you now is a cross-section of this thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity notably contains the heart, trachea, esophagus, and thymus, and these are located within the central mediastinum. Here's the posterior mediastinum, and then the anterior mediastinum. In this thoracic cavity, the lungs take up the rest of the space, right? So they share. You can see the heart in the middle mediastinum, and again, the lungs take up the bulk of the thoracic cavity. And in the lungs, I would like to point out a few special parts. This includes the parietal pleura that lines the thoracic wall. The parietal pleura is right here, right, that lines the thoracic wall. Then I'd like to show you the visceral pleura, shown in blue. And this pleura is basically a layer covering the lungs. And normally, the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura are touching together. They're pushed together, and there's a little space between them called the intrapleural space. And as we talk, that space can actually become bigger under certain circumstances, and meaning that there'll be distance between the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura. And we also have the diaphragm, which is shown here. Here's the lungs. There's a diaphragm under them. And the diaphragm is a dome-shaped skeletal muscle of respiration. And this separates the thoracic and abdominal cavities. So above the diaphragm, we have the thoracic cavity, and below it, we have the abdominal cavity. Here are x-rays of lungs from a female, shown in the left, and from a male, shown in the right. And the lungs are basically these big dark regions, and the mediastinum is this area in the center, right? You can see the heart, and this is what a typical chest x-ray looks like. So what I'd like to show you now are the alveoli, and I want to tell you that the alveoli are air sacs in the lungs where gas exchange occurs. The average adult has 300 million of them. These alveoli are round, they're like spears, and they have a very large surface area that allow rapid diffusion across the membrane of the alveoli. Each alveolus is one cell layer thick, and in fact they're the thinnest cells in the human body. And as you saw before in those little pictures, that they form clusters at the ends of respiratory bronchioles. We have two types of alveolar cells. We have type 1 alveolar cells, and this is one right here. It's a type 1 alveolar cell over here with the membrane around it. It's pretty big. And then this type 1 alveolar cell is where gas exchange occurs. And 95 to 97% of the total surface area of the alveoli are taken up by the alveolar cells, type 1. So type 1 alveolar cells represent the majority of cells in the alveoli. In the alveoli, we also have type 2 alveolar cells. Type 2 alveolar cells notably secrete pulmonary surfactant, and they also reabsorb sodium and water to prevent fluid buildup. So these play a really important role. And the surfactant in the alveoli help them to expand and contract, and they prevent there being too much. They prevent the inside of an alveolus from sticking to the other side of it. So it's like a lubricant. So basically, during exhalation, when we're exhaling, the alveolus can close, and then during inhalation, we want to have the alveolus open up again, like a balloon, and we want to make sure that the inside wall of the alveolus will not be sticking to the other wall when it collapses. So surfactant plays a really important role in making them not stick together so they can rapidly expand when we inhale. And I also want to show you before we move on that there's a macrophage. Macrophages do survey for microorganisms in the lung to see if there's any microorganisms coming in that can potentially infect our bodies. And I want to show you how close the capillaries are to each alveolus. They're very, very close to allow the rapid diffusion of oxygen going from the alveolus to the capillaries. And then we have the rapid diffusion of carbon dioxide from the capillaries into the alveolus. So this exchange happens right in the alveolus. And of course, there's millions of them, so it's happening in alveoli. Here is electron micrographs showing some more detail. Here's this bronchiole, and then at the end we have the alveoli, and here's a close look of the capillary that's in the alveolar wall. And we see the red blood cells, we see the type 1 alveolar cell, and just want to point out how close they are, right? That distance is very small, allowing the rapid diffusion of carbon dioxide and oxygen across the capillary wall and the alveolar wall. So I mentioned that the type 2 alveolar cell secretes surfactant. Surfactant is shown in the blue, very light blue color, and this is going to coat the alveolar wall. The surfactant is made of a hydrophobic protein and phospholipids, and it critically reduces surface tension between water molecules by reducing the number of hydrogen bonds between the water molecules. And that's really critical because during expiration, although it gets really concentrated and tight in the alveolus, and if we want them to expand, we need to make sure there's not a high surface tension. That would be providing resistance to expansion. We need a very easy expansion to be happening in our alveoli.